Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, everyone. John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 180 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. I have received a number of listener requests to get Phil Massaro back on the show and to do an episode on double rifles. So with that in mind, I decided to kill two birds with one stone today. Phil Massaro is back on the show to talk about the ins and outs of double rifles with me. So we will talk briefly about their history, how double rifles became so associated with hunting in Africa, the pros and cons of hunting with a double rifle, many of the different cartridges used in them, what makes and models are most common these days, how much they cost, and some of the other interesting and very important aspects of using a double rifle that you need to keep in mind. So this is a great episode on the fundamentals of double rifles that you will really enjoy, and I know that you're going to learn a lot, and most of the questions that people have are going to be answered in this episode. Now, before we get started with all of that, I have a couple things I need your help with. First, if you haven't already done so, please pause the show right now and hit the subscribe or follow button in whatever podcast app you use. If you're not already subscribed, doing so will help me reach more hunters like you who are interested in this sort of content. So please subscribe. Next, sign up for my email list at huntingguns101.com. You'll get my free ebook when you do so, and you will also receive the email updates I send out every weekday. If you like the Big Game Hunting Podcast, you will love those emails. And like the podcast, I talk about all sorts of things in those emails: cartridge and bullet selection, hunting in Africa, funny hunting stories, etc. I also send out an in-stock email update every Friday to everyone on the list with some of the latest news on ammo I have found and where you can get it to navigate this still ongoing ammo shortage. That's huntingguns101.com, or send me an email at john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com and tell me you want to join the list. Okay, let's get started talking with Phil about double rifles. All right, well, good morning, Phil. It is great having you back on the show. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Good morning, John. Thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, so double rifles have a certain romantic appeal associated with hunting in Africa, especially dangerous game, right? Kevin Robertson once told me that doubles and elephant hunting go together like strawberries and cream. Lots of famous safari hunters from Theodore Roosevelt to Craig Boddington have used a double rifle of one sort or another. So there's definitely a certain cool factor associated with going on safari with a double, and there's also practical reasons to do so in some situations, but there's absolutely downsides to going that route as well in other situations. So, we'll dive into all that stuff here today, but I guess first, can you start off with a especially interesting story of one of your hunts with a double rifle?
My favorite one was I had just gotten my 470, and we were in the Choriza Safari Block. Brian Van Blerk was my professional hunter, and we were doing an episode of Tracks Across Africa. So I'm, here I am with my own 470 double, and chest thumping, having a great time. And we just couldn't close the deal. It was, it was 115 degrees. The wind would swirl, a bush buck would bark, and the herd would go off. So the last absolute hour, it was day 8 of a 7-day safari. Brian goes, "Come on, we're going to go out in the morning before you drive out." I'm like, come on, Brian. We got on the herd at 6 o'clock in the morning. By 6:40, we were crawling up on the edge of the herd, and Brian goes, "There's your buffalo." On a knee, 85 yards, bang, I hear brrr, the big death bellow. He goes down, hit him right in the shoulder, and for some reason just put him right down. Stand up, and Brian points with his other arm. He goes, "There's his brother. Take him too." Bang! I shoot him. I'm like, wait a minute. What did I just do? That's a lot of money. So long story short, I got to pull a double with a double. And this second buffalo, because I had a solid in the left barrel, he took the solid to the lungs, went out with the herd into the Sand River. It's the Sangla River there. And I ended up having to finish him at like 185 yards across a wide open sand flat, offhand, and it was on camera and possibly the greatest shot I've ever made, and I never want to try it again.
Oh, yeah, there you go, right?
Such a great time. It really, John, it's serious. This was, if you had to say what was the greatest 30 seconds of hunting in my life, it was that 30 seconds.
Well, that is a good story, and it kind of illustrates your the pros and the cons of using a double pretty well, though, as we'll dive into here soon.
Well, when you say double rifle, here's where the tide turned for me as a young man who never had any idea I'd be doing this stuff. I was going into a movie with a then girlfriend, and it was one of those comedy romance things, or whatever they call them, girly kind of flicks. And I really didn't want to see it. And we walked into the movie theater, and I think it had 3 or 4 theaters in there. I went to go buy some popcorn, and I look, and there's this poster. And it's Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas, the Ghost in the Darkness, and he's pointing that double rifle, and it's just the twin muzzles. And I just went, okay, I don't know what you're going to go see, but I know what I'm going to go see. and I had to be in the mid-'90s, and that movie was just, I know some of it was BS and fiction and whatever in comparison to what really happened, but the iconic image of that double rifle being pointed just was a game changer for me.
And definitely, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I was actually just thinking about that movie this morning in advance of our conversation. That was one of the first instances in my life I became aware that there was such a thing as a double rifle. I've heard of double-barreled shotguns before and bolt-action rifles and all that stuff. And I was like, what the heck is this? And Michael Douglas's character in that movie was such a he was completely fictional, but he was a very colorful and very interesting guy that, man, you just want to know more about him, and he just seems so interesting.
Absolutely. They did it right. They really did, and I think it was a Holland & Holland Royal he carried in the movie. And, I've had the opportunity, I've never fired one, but I did get to tour the Holland & Holland store in London. They took me in and, kind of shut it down for a half an hour, and we examined some very plain but still expensive models. But I handled a deluxe engraved Holland & Holland Royal in 470 that went for almost $400,000.
Oh my goodness!
And I'm like, please take this out of my hands. I don't even want to touch this thing. But it was, the gamut of the double rifle runs from, some of the Italian models that can be extremely affordable and or cheap, depending on how you want to look at the word, up to guns that can run well into the 6 figures. And there's a bunch of stuff in between. It's not necessarily unattainable for the common man. It's just you'll make a sacrifice. But there are, like you said earlier, pros and cons to the choice of weapon.
So a double rifle is a more specialized firearm that works great for certain things. So I guess, can you provide a little bit of some insight into the history of double rifles and specifically why they became so linked to hunting in Africa in popular culture to this day?
Well, I mean, if you look back to the era before the repeating firearm was readily available, mid-1800s, you had essentially one shot. I mean, still the Civil War, we were fighting here with, Zouave rifles and stuff like that had to be loaded and shot, rinse and repeat. Even the revolver was a relatively new, for a sidearm. So the idea of having 2 shots without needing to reload is obviously advantageous. Like you said, it was a double shotgun thing. And when you're shooting flocks of birds or multiple targets, it makes life easier. That translated over into the rifle world where you didn't have to reload and you had an instantaneous second shot. With a scatter gun, it's much easier to quote unquote regulate because you're throwing a pattern. But with a rifle where it's a single projectile trying to be precise, there's a bit of an art to that to get them to strike the same point. And, you've got 2 side-by-side barrels, and that's called regulation. So what they'll do is they got a rib between the barrels, and they'll actually wire it together before it's soldered and tap little wedges in and about until they get the 2 barrels to shoot to the same point, and then they solder the rib. So it's a very labor-intensive firearm. That being said, it translated so well into Africa for a couple of reasons. One, with dangerous game, you do have, and this is going back to that era of exploration, an instantaneous second shot. And if you've ever been amongst dangerous game, I can only imagine, the pucker factor. You shoot, the animal doesn't drop or run off or die, and it starts to charge you when you have an unloaded weapon. That's got to be a little disconcerting. So there's the instantaneous backup shot for that reason. The other idea was that in those rugged areas of, colonial Africa, you had essentially 2 guns in one. So if you broke a firing pin or something malfunctioned in one barrel, you still had a second barrel and a functioning firearm. So it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes perfect sense with especially the second part where you had, like you said, two guns in one. I'd never thought about it that way until you just brought it up like that.
Well, from a practicality point of view, imagine you had a falling block Farcarson or some sort of a single shot rifle. If your firing pin breaks and you don't have the means of fixing it, or if God forbid something happened to the chamber, or you got a shell stuck, you're out of business. This way, at least you had either the left or the right barrel, whichever one you weren't using, to make it fully functional, and you had another single shot, if you would.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can't just run to the hardware store and get a new part to fix it or whatever.
No. Considering that John Pandoro Taylor found out about the Second World War when someone had wrapped something he needed and mailed it to him in a newspaper. Oh, the world's at war. He was that far in the bush. And that was in the 40s.
And so I imagine too, what you were also going down that line of thinking with the fact that they were just kind of labor intensive anyway, that kind of just maybe pushed it further in that direction of the higher end gun makers, where Purdy, Rigby, Holland and whatnot, and so we're kind of eventually, since it wasn't something that you were able to crank out anyway, they just kind of went even further into the high end luxury category with it.
Right. It took a craftsman to make it, and no slight to what happens today. There's a lot of great gunsmiths out there, but in my humbling opinion, cobbling together a Remington 700 action in a barrel isn't quite on the same plane as a guy who can actually regulate a double rifle. Different strokes, different folks, and I don't put down anybody's anything, but you've got to recognize the fact that this is extremely labor intensive. And if it's not done right, it's actually worthless. I mean, I've seen some double rifles that aren't regulated properly, that won't hit, the two bullets won't strike within 8 inches of each other at 50, 60 yards. And that to me is just A, inexcusable, and B, unusable. So you do to a certain degree get what you pay for. I'm an unabashed proponent of Heim rifles from, Sur Germany. And, the Heim is English styling, if you will, because let's face it. I mean, a Rigby Rising Bite, a Jeffries, a Wesley Richards, a Holland and Holland. They're classic names. So the Heim has that British styling, if you will, in the vein of, but it's got the German, metallurgic craftsmanship. The Germans were always very precise in their work. A Mauser 98, had possibly the greatest bolt gun ever made. We're still trying to copy it and better it, and I don't know that we have. But, the Heim rifle from Germany has, it's especially the new model 89. It's got it's a Webley and Scott kind of, style action, the PRV-1, very close to the old Wesley Richards look. And, it's got some of the modern appointments and CNC machining that just make it a better firearm. And it's much more affordable than any of those British guns that come with a pedigree, if you will. And again, if you're well heeled enough to go buy a Rigby Rising Bite, God bless you. But
definitely.
For me, that Heim 89 is the best value on the market.
Now, kind of in the same, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here. I know, German gun manufacturers were also, they made a lot of combination guns over the years. So instead of
drillings, right?
Yeah, so instead of two rifle barrels of the same cartridge, you had say a larger bore rifle, a rimfire, and a shotgun, or something like that. And so I'm sure that definitely appealed to their sensibilities there, the way they did things, the sort of hunting they did, that sort of thing. But
especially considering Germany, especially the continental Europe idea that hunting was for the aristocracy. Mm-hmm. So when you had a firearm, it was an heirloom piece. So if what was that phrase? Beware the man with just one rifle. He probably knows how to use it. When you've got two 20-bore shotgun barrels over top of a 7x64 Brennecke, you switch the barrel, you know how to use your firearm. It was the family heirloom, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes back to that kind of mentality, you can tell. But, the double rifle in and of itself has become a niche weapon. They're just not very common. And the reason being that, thanks to the Mauser 98 and a lot of its clones, a Winchester 70 and, down the line, The bolt-action repeating rifle is a more affordable and attainable yet effective design. I mean, undoubtedly, the double rifle is faster for the second shot, but not the third.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. A bolt gun, you put 4 in a magazine. As fast as you can work a bolt effectively, you got 4 shots. With a double, you're going to have to break and reload, and that's part of the mystique. And you either take it or you don't.
Right. And like you said, sometimes you need that second shot to be absolutely instantaneous, because there are certain times that no matter how fast you are with the bolt, you're not going to get a third shot with it.
Right.
You get it done with 1 or 2, or you're not getting it done.
So traditionally, if you want to look at the mindset, with a double rifle, you've got a romantic gun, readily and easily chambered in those big rimmed cartridges. It's kind of hard to make a 470 nitro feed from a box magazine because of the rim. But you can take advantage of all those rimmed cartridges, which are really, really cool. It's a shorter weapon usually because there is no receiver. There's just chamber. And the downfall is it's a bit of a heavier weapon because you do have 2 barrels versus 1. Now, traditionally also, they're iron-sighted, although that's changing. So you've got the limitations of a scope bolt gun versus an iron-sighted double. I, at 50 years old, can tell you that I don't see irons as well as I used to. I can still shoot effectively, but the lack of magnification is an issue. Especially when you've got to thread the needle. You can do it easier with a low-powered scope than you can with a set of iron sights. And I'll give you one quick example. On my last buffalo hunt, I actually wounded and lost a bolt. Due to no fault of my own, just circumstances that happened. There must have been a branch or something in the way. We were hunting in Makuti in Zimbabwe, and we got within 45 yards of the nicest buffalo bull I've ever seen in my life. And we were on camera, and he says, lean up against that tree and just take him. And I held true. There was no, you could tell from me on camera, there was no errant shot or flinching or any of that nonsense. And we heard the bullet strike, and we heard the buffalo crash. And I said, this is great. What happened was the bullet must have hit a stick I didn't see, some sort of little twig, and it deflected forward across his brisket. And we tracked that buffalo for 20-some miles. He stopped bleeding, and he lived another day and left a concession. So I paid the price. He went on to live and spread his beautiful genes, I hope. And would that have been preventable with a bolt action with a scope on it? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But, it does come, you need to say to yourself, I'm either going to scope a double, which I've seen happen, or, there's choices of, a Trigicon red dot sight, which don't really destroy the balance of the gun, but yet take it to a single focal plane and allow a little bit more precise shot placement, if that makes sense. The sighting system can pose an issue.
Now, it seems like as well, not only are you dealing with iron sights, but it seems like a lot of these doubles are using open express type sights as well instead of a peep sight, right?
Right. I mean, you can change it up, but what I like is what they call a shallow V, not a buckhorn U sight. It's a 140-degree V, and what it does, it gives you that field of view, even with iron sights, where the mind naturally centers that bead in that little V, but you can see what you're aiming at. Because a lot of times, on an elephant, you're looking even close. There's a lot of gray skin there. And if you start to cover it up with a buckhorn sight or a more fine iron sight, you can get into trouble. You want to be able to see what's going on the animal, yet still place the shot, accurately. This runs into trouble at, 150, 200 yards. And you can use a double that far. Like I said, I did it at 180 some in Zimbabwe with a bit of holdover and, some luck. But I wouldn't want to do that all the time. It's a challenge, and I'm not going to lie. Mm-hmm. So the thing with dangerous game, though, is that most of the time your shots are well inside 100. On elephant, you're rarely going to be outside of 40. And on buffalo, 85's a long shot, with an iron-sighted gun. So you're going to give up some of those shots. I mean, with a 5-power scope on a 375 or a 416 Rigby, a 200-yard shot is not impossible at all. I mean, it can be done. Maybe 150 if you got a buffalo, standing there with Dagga Boy on his own across the flat. That happens a lot in Mozambique and other places that are more wide open. So you are leaving something on the table to a certain degree, but it's kind of cool to get in close, and smell the smells and hear the sounds and, use a double rifle in that way.
Right. And it seems like everything about a double rifle, from the cartridges, we'll talk about cartridges here in a minute, but especially the bigger bore cartridges that they're commonly chambered in, are great up close. The way the double itself is constructed, not only from the sighting system that it has, but the fact that I'm sure that a well-built double is designed to point very quickly and easy, so you can take a faster shot up close if you need to. And then
it's like a fine pointing shotgun. It's a great point.
And then also, like you touched on briefly a minute ago, but we'll hit it again. The way that it is constructed, say in contrast to a bolt action rifle, you can have a 24-inch barrel on a double rifle, but your overall length of the rifle is going to be shorter because you're not having to have that action, the room to throw the bolt and all
receiver.
That stuff.
Yeah, you're cutting 2.5, 3 inches off it right off the bat.
Okay, yeah. So you got a more compact rifle for a given barrel length there, and so you kind of add all these things up, and you have something that is just absolutely outstanding. Say 40, 60 meters, something like that, or closer.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the downside, or the flip side, I should say, there are smaller calibers available that are used for regular hunting. In Poland, I borrowed a really nice little side-by-side 8x57 JRS, which is the rimmed 8x57. And, it had a little, 1-5 on it, or 1-4 scope. And it was a great little rifle. It was a driven hunt, and we were shooting, wild boar and foxes and stuff. And that was just a pleasure to hunt with. Here in the States, Heim makes an over-under double rifle in cartridges from, again, I think it's either 7x57 or 8x57, all the way up to 45-70. And I used the 45-70 here in New York on a deer hunt. You want to talk? I think I had 22-inch barrels, over under, light as a feather, 1-5 scope, and I took a great deer in the Catskills with it. That was a really fun gun to hunt with.
Interesting. So it seems like you just kind of look around online or in Cabela's or any place that they would have these for sale. It seems like more of the double rifles are a side-by-side as opposed to an over-under. Do you know why that's the case?
It's the classic look. I think it's just a matter of aesthetics. And actually, a side-by-side rifle is more difficult to regulate than an over-under. But the over-under doesn't, it's kind of like shotguns. There are some beautiful over-under shotguns, but when someone hands you an AH Fox or one of those classic looking straight stock side-by-side shotguns, it just has the look. And that's what we want. Why does a 57 Chevy still command the prices it does? It's not ergonomic like a Kia.
Right.
Because it's a 57 Chevy and it just looks badass. So, when you're looking at a double rifle like that, it has the look, and it's a nostalgia thing. It really is. If the world were just running on practicality, we'd probably all be shooting a 3.75 Ruger and some cheap bolt gun. Mm-hmm.
Now, you've talked a little bit about regulation. I think that is something that someone that's just kind of has a very casual appreciation of double rifles really doesn't know what the heck you're talking about. And it's something that if you're going to really hunt with one, you got to really get into the weeds with it. Can you talk about that and how it relates to ammo, sighting in your rifle, all of that stuff?
So what happens is this. You've got two barrels laying side by side, and let's just use round numbers. They're roughly an inch apart, okay, 1.25 inches, whatever the case may be. The goal of regulation is to get them not to run parallel, but to cross at a specific distance, which is usually 75 yards. So you want the two bullets there, you want their path to cross and hit the same exact point of impact in theory at 75 yards. And again, in theory, they would be 1.25 inches, whatever they started out at 150 yards. And then would start to diverge wider, if that makes sense. So what the regulator has to do is to take these two barrels with ammunition of velocity X, wire them together on the bench in outside the shop. They have a whole regulation range, and tap wedges in there until he gets them spaced perfectly to do exactly what I just described. They'll strike the same point of impact at 75 yards or whatever the regulation distance is. And at that point in time, he's going to take solder, and they're going to solder those two barrels along the rib together so that they don't move. What happens then, and it's a totally different concept than a single barrel firearm. You've got two barrels in that are going to recoil in a weird rotation, and there's all kinds of stuff that goes on that way. But they're essentially the performance is married to the velocity of the ammunition with which it was regulated. So, for example, Time uses Hornady's dangerous game stuff to regulate their double rifles. And my 470, I think I clocked the Hornady stuff at 2145, and it shoots Hornady's factory stuff great. I'm a hand loader, so when you go to hand load for one of these guns, what ends up happening is you can't just say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to bump up the speed to 2250 instead of 2150, and I'm going to get better performance." And the next thing you notice is on your target, your shots are 4 or 5 inches apart, up and to the left or up and to the right, depending on how the gun reacts to it. You're like, "What's going on?" You're not loading for a specific a consistency. You're loading to a specific velocity, if that makes sense. Because what you need to do is replicate the velocity at which the gun was put together. Did I say that right? That seemed...
That sounds like how I understood it as well. Now, going down this rabbit hole a little bit farther, you said that your guns were regulated using Hornady ammo. I assume that if you took a federal load with a different bullet, but at a, say, call it an identical velocity, it would probably shoot very close, but not exactly regulated the same as it would with the Hornady stuff then,
right? Exactly. And federal makes great 470 ammo. It runs a little hot in my gun. It actually runs about 2220. And for me, the federal hits high into the left. And I scratched my head. I said, "What's the matter with this gun?" And I went back to the Hornady and it hits point of impact. I said, "Aha," threw it on a chronograph. And when I found out the higher speed, that it affects it in that manner. So what ends up happening is you get a gun from the 30s that was regulated with the old Kynoch ammo from Britain, which you can't get anymore. And now you're kind of in a quandary. Now what do I do? And it might take some experimentation velocity-wise with hand loads or something like that if you can't get any of the factory stuff to work. Or you might have to play with your hand load velocity to try and, reverse engineer what it was regulated for. Or plan B, you have, take the gun to a very competent gunsmith, have it re-regulated. Take it apart, take the two barrels apart, and have him re-regulate the gun, which is a costly and very dangerous maneuver with an expensive rifle.
Yeah, no doubt. I'll bet. And like you said, I'll bet that is made doubly complicated by the fact that the British were notorious liars with the velocities on their Kynoch ammunition, and you had to...
the 470 always hit 2150. Sure it did, in 32-inch barrels. And I'm not carrying 32-inch barrels around all day. So the great lie of velocity, especially when they were using ballistic pendulums and did not have, the benefits of an Ayler 35P chronograph, that's the game you play. And when you enter this world, you kind of have to know that. Ammo availability, I just got to shoot one of Elmer Keith's Wesley Richards in 476 Nitro Express. Try and find ammo for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but even finding reloading dies for that would be challenging these days.
No doubt.
And so this isn't just a matter of okay, I'm gonna put my scope 6 clicks down and we'll be dead on with this ammo. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes on to it, and you can be very restricted with the ammo that works well for you, huh?
Absolutely. Your best bet is to buy a modern rifle. In ammo that you can get readily available. Getting back to the cartridge thing we were going to talk about, there's a slew of Nitro Express cartridges, which are classic, and you'll read about, 475 number 2 Jeffries and all these different kind of cartridges that were up and down the line when they were being developed. The 470 is probably the most popular to this day, just because of the ammo availability. But there's a lot of great designs out there. The 450 Nitro is a great choice. 450, 400, 400 grain bullets at 2050. Very light recoiling, perfectly adequate for everything up to and including elephant. You can easily take buffalo. A 500 Nitro is available. So it depends on, your recoil tolerance and what you really want to do with the weapon.
So I'm looking at the Heim website right now for the 89B. They say it's available in 300 Win Mag, 375 H&H belted, 375 flanged, 416 Rigby, 416 500 nitro, 450 400 nitro 3-inch, 450 nitro 3 1/4, 470 nitro, 500 nitro, 577 nitro. So we have a mix of both belted and rimmed ammunition here, but it seems like doubles are more common and maybe more reliable with rimmed cartridges.
You'll find my buddy Mike Fell's got a great double in 4.58 Win Mag because the ammo was available before this whole resurgence happened in the late 80s. There was a period from about 1960 till, I don't know, when did Federal bring back the 470 stuff? 88, 89? In that window, there was 3 decades where you just couldn't get ammo for these double guns, and you were finding them in Johannesburg and in Bulawayo for sale for $1,000. I mean, you couldn't feed it, so you had a useless weapon unless you were some sort of machining genius who could make his own dies. So when Federal brought back the 470 and the 416 Rigby and again it's either 88 or 89, pardon my memory this morning. It changed the game, and a lot of those guns came back out of the closet, and then they said, Hornady hopped on and said later on, what about the 450? What about the 450 400? What about the 500? And everybody kind of, there was a resurgence in these calibers. The belted cartridge is belted for, it's a belt of strength. It had nothing to do with strength at all. What the belt is for is to get the positive head spacing of a rimmed cartridge, that the real definitive nonsense, not off the shoulder, without having the big rim, which doesn't feed from a box magazine. So it's the blend of a rimless design and a rim design. Now, that gives it a little bit more for the extractor to bite on, but doubles in belted cartridges, while Heim does advertise them, they're very, very rare. You're not going to see very many of them available. Predominantly, these are for rimmed cartridges. And I would say that, if you're looking at dangerous game, the bottom of the barrel I would use where it's legal is the 9.3 by 74 rimmed. Up into the 375 flanged, which also is a British term for rimmed. 450, 400 is an incredibly popular choice. Heim sells a lot of those. Chris Sells, who was from the president of Heim USA, that's the gun he uses most, and that was the caliber I used in the first time I ever hunted with a double in Mozambique. But I still think the 470 remains the most popular choice of the lot.
And so I'm looking right now on a couple different websites for ammo. Barnes and their Vortex Safari. You've got the 470 and the 500 nitro, in addition to the belted stuff and whatnot, and the 416 Rigby. Hornady. Let's see here, 9.3 by 74, 450 400, 450 nitro. Of course, the 470. Of course, the 500. Federal. Let's see here. 500 nitro,
470 for sure.
Yeah, of course the 470. Yep. 9.3 by 74. Ballistics on the 9.3 by 74, are they basically the same as the 9.3 by 62, just in a rimmed cartridge?
Might be a little bit slower. Let's see
here. On their website, they claim, I'm looking at it now, 286 at 2360. So I guess all depends on your individual load.
You're in the ballpark. I don't think any animal will be able to tell the difference between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of I figured just as much with the rimmed aspect being much more popular than the non-rimmed or the belted stuff, depending on the exact cartridge. Now, is the 375 flanged, once again, is that just basically a 375 H&H just with a rim?
Right, with a rim instead of the belt. And there's also, the 416 Rigby has always been a rimless cartridge. Rigby recently, just a couple of years ago, came out with the 416 number 2, which is the rimmed version of the 416 Rigby. So when you're going through these cartridges and you see a cartridge with a designation that says number 2, it's either a different variant on the parent, or quite often it's a rimmed cartridge. So you'll see a 350 Rigby Magnum and then a 350 number 2, which is the rimmed variant of the rimless 350.
Now, so we're talking about pros and cons. Seems like that's definitely a con of a lot of this stuff, where you got just a handful of cartridges that are real suitable, at least for dangerous game, in a double rifle and factory ammo is going to be ridiculously expensive for it, and you're probably going to have one solid and one soft load that works really well in your double.
It depends on what level you want to play. I've gotten, I don't know, 5 or 6 different projectiles to shoot well in my 470. Solids and softs. From the Woodley Hydro and the Barnes Banded solid. Swift A-frames worked out real well, and the Swift Breakaway solid was good. Federal's trophy bonded sledgehammer works wonderfully in my gun. That solid is just a beast. So, it depends on how much you want to play. This double rifle game, don't I got a buddy of mine who likes to talk about going on a hunt, and he puts everything on an Excel spreadsheet. I said, why would you apply logic to hunting? Don't do this. Again, if we want to go from the most practical point of view, buy a Ruger and 375 Ruger. It's readily available. It does everything you'll ever need it to do, and just go hunting. But there's a certain, you got to go down the rabbit hole mentally and be that kind of guy to really get into a double rifle. And some folks just take it to an extreme, but it's fun. I'm not going to lie. You're carrying a big stick in your hand, bang, bang. The look of a 470, the way it goes thump down the tube when you load it. And, they work wonderfully. I mean, I've shot buffalo with 416s and, other stuff like that, but, a 470 is a period at the end of the sentence for a buffalo gun, and it's wonderful on elephant. So, again, it's the up-close factor that you really want to depend on that fast second shot.
Now, at the same time, too, are double rifles, what is their suitability for left-handed shooters? I know Craig Boddington uses one a lot.
Well, I think that would depend on the make of the gun, whether or not it's got a cheek piece. They are made left-handed. I mean, you can have it stocked to a lefty. Mm-hmm. There's no two ways about that. Unlike a scope, when you've got iron sights, it's the bead and the notch, and that's where it hits. So there isn't a problem of superimposition. You tap the sights to where it has to go. If it's got to go up or down, you either get a higher or lower front bead, or you tap the rear sight left or right if you got to cross over to the left-handed side of the gun. So knowing Craig, and he's hunted with a lot of different doubles, including a bunch of Heims, and Craig's got a Rigby, and I think he's got one in 450 and one in 470 if I'm not mistaken, and I know he just got another one in 303 British, an older vintage gun. Craig shoots doubles really, really well. And he's better versed than I am in how these things work. So yeah, you can go. I know Ivan Carter shoots left-handed. He's got a Heim 600. So depending on what has to happen, there are ways to move the sights. You can tap the sights up and down, left and right. But essentially, what's going to happen is those two barrels are just going to hit where they're going to hit, and that's when you mess with the ammo, that's really what has a drastic effect.
And so we've kind of touched kind of all around a lot of the real popular stuff that's in use these days. You use a Heim 89B in your 470, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, what are some of the other things that are real popular?
500's a real popular gun, especially among professional hunters. So a lot of people tell you, oh, no, the double guns are reserved just for the PHs. And the PH's job is to clean up messes. Rarely will you see a PH have to shoot anything further than 25 yards. And if he does, you just made an absolute mess as a client and don't know what you're doing. So the PH's job, if you want to look at it this way, it's big, dangerous game, most of the time wounded, most of the time set up in thick stuff at very close distances. So he wants the flexibility of iron sights. He has to see rapidly and get on target. And you can also understand how that quick second shot is paramount to a professional hunter. Mm-hmm. You get a charging buffalo, bang, bang. You don't have to worry about working a bolt, just switch to that second trigger. And we'll touch on this in the one trigger versus two in a second. But the 500 is a very popular choice among professional hunters because it does have a level of performance a little bit better than the 470. I think the larger frontal diameter, I think the heavier bullet weight does make a visible difference. I know a lot of guys who swear that, frontal shots on elephant, a 500 stuns them more than a 470 does when you've got a charging elephant front, coming at you face on. It could be debated. I don't feel handicapped with a 470 in any way. I know a lot of guys that use 470s for backup. but the 500 still remains a perfectly viable choice. Guys like Cliff Walker from Zimbabwe shoot a 5.77, which is even bigger yet. And, now you're getting into a level of recoil that, kind of separates the men from the boys. I got to shoot Ernest Hemingway's 5.77 Wesley Richards. And I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty recoil insensitive, but, the 5.77 and the 700 Nitro made a lasting impression on me.
Oh, man, I'll bet.
I tell you, that 700 is just ridiculous. I can shoot it. I had to. I'm a gun writer. Guys, if you want to shoot it, it's a 23-pound rifle. If you can imagine, a 23-pound double rifle that shoots a 1,000-grain bullet at 2,000 feet per second. And it's the only time in my history that I've ever had a gun physically pick my left foot off the ground. It rocked me back so hard.
Ooh, man.
Crazy. So one was enough for me.
I don't doubt it. For the listener who's not as familiar with the details of this stuff, so with the 470, you're shooting a 500-grain bullet at about 2150. With right. The 500, you're shooting a 570-grain bullet at about the same velocity, right? Right.
So there's an additional 70 grains of bullet. It's a 510 diameter. So it's a little bit 475 versus 510. You got a bit more frontal diameter and a little bit more kinetic energy and bullet weight.
Mm-hmm.
So it's again we always try to quantify everything as there's a line drawn in the sand. If you get a shooter who's good with a 450, 400, which is, a 400 grain bullet at 2050, you'll watch elephant drop and buffalo drop left and right. I mean, it's a good cartridge, but if you're the guy who has to clean up messes, and those messes include wounded animals that will stomp you to, a pile of jelly, I would want the biggest gun I could effectively shoot.
Yeah, definitely. This is something that Kevin Robertson and I talked recently about on an elephant hunting podcast, about the ins and outs of it, and kind of how the situation is just different for a client taking an initial shot on any game. But in this case, you're talking about elephant, with the way that the elephant's head is raised quite often for a client, and whereas if a PH is shooting it and it's coming at you, the head is normally lowered, and so the place where you shot, you need to place your bullet is different and needs to penetrate a little bit differently, and you just don't have any room for error with it there, and so it's just different.
Hunting elephant, especially with brain shots, is a tricky business. I've hunted exactly one elephant, and I took 2 body shots with a bolt action 404 Jeffrey and killed him cleanly and quickly. But when you are dealing with that brain shot, and it's a humane instant death when you do it right, you have to realize that the brain pretty much lies between the ears. So if you look at the elephant, from the side, you'll see the ear hole, and the ear is shaped very much like a human ear, and just behind it is where the brain's located in the back of the cavity. But when you look at them from the front, and you were to make that imaginary, they call it a broomstick between the ears, and you rotate the head up and down depending on the position and attitude of the elephant, the location of that brain in respect to the front part of the elephant's head really changes, quite rapidly, and quite radically, as a matter of fact. So you really need the anatomy. Walter Bell's, Karamoja Bell wrote a book, Wanderings of an Elephant Hunter, in 1923. That's almost 100 years old, and in there he was a talented artist. He made a bunch of sketches, depicting elephant anatomy and such. And it's perfectly viable to this day. He really did a good job with that. So, when you're the professional hunter and you've got a client who is, new around elephant, and, we all are new at something at some point in time. And, I've been as close as 8 yards from elephant, and I'll be brutally honest, they're scary animals. You look at the kind of thing that is, I can't screw this up, because I got other people in the thing with me in the party. I got a PH, I got trackers, and whoever else is there. You want to know what you're doing, and I'm not going to say that you can get away with, horsepower for an errant shot, because it doesn't work that way. But I would still say that I would want the biggest gun I could carry effectively.
Mm-hmm. Now, for the listener to get a kind of a more in-depth discussion on this stuff, check out episode 177 of this podcast with Kevin Robertson and I. We really go into that in excruciating detail. You talked, getting back to double rifles, you talked about the 1 versus 2 trigger deal. Can you dive into that?
There can be a real issue with a person who, like me, grew up his entire life with a single trigger firearm. And I don't know if any of you have ever gone to, a double trigger shotgun, and you pull the right barrel and you get on the second bird or clay bird or whatever, and you go back and you pull the right barrel again and it doesn't go off. It's instinctive. So there's a bit of a practice regimen that needs to go on with a double rifle. You've got two sets of triggers, one sitting forward, one sitting more rearward. Usually the right trigger is the forward trigger and the left is the rear. And what can happen is there's a couple of caveats you got to be aware of. I remember my father-in-law, when I first got the double, he's like, wow, that's a really cool gun. I said, come on, Tim, we'll go shoot this thing. And I gave him 2 cartridges, and I didn't know that he'd never fired a double trigger weapon before, and he doubled the gun. He pulled both triggers at once. His trigger slipped off the first trigger. His finger slipped off the first trigger and went to the back trigger, and he sent 1,000 grains of lead downrange at light speed, and he almost went over, and my gun was in the air, and it was just a terrible, terrible scene. You need to know where the triggers are. You need to practice and become damn near intimate with the gun. Because when the chips are down, you're going to fall to your training, not rise to the level of your expectations, as they say at the SAM course in Texas. So you really, some guys are adamant about pulling the rear trigger, the left barrel first, to prevent any chance of doubling the gun. So when you got, and that makes sense. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm a guitar player and, used to a little bit more fine dexterity. I've knock wood here, never doubled my 470 or any shotgun. I kind of know where they are, but I also spend a lot of time with snap caps and other things like that in the field. And, what I'll actually go through and do is create a training regimen for my double. I load up, spent primers, and I'll weigh out a powder charge of sand the same weight as the powder, so that I can make dummy cartridges that have the same weight and feel as actual ones, and practice loading and extracting without taking my eyes off the target and things like that. So what happens when you have 2 versus 1 trigger is back to that idea of having 2 different guns. If you break a trigger in the field with a single trigger firearm, you're done. Now, how often do you break a trigger? I mean, I don't know. I'm not an explorer who goes out for 8-10 months at a rip or years. If I'm 14 days on a safari, I'm doing really well. But in retrospect, with a single trigger, it can be difficult to choose which barrel shoots first. So there might be an instance where you want to use a solid versus a soft. And a lot of times I will load a solid in the left barrel and a soft point in the right. The idea being that you want, the solid for backup after that initial shot. And because, your buffalo may be running away and you have to go into the hip or at the base of the tail and up into the lungs and that kind of thing. So there's a bunch of different schools of thought. I prefer two sets of triggers. I prefer 2 triggers for a double rifle. That same Dallas Safari Club historic rifle shoot, I got to shoot Elmer Keith's gun, which had a single trigger. He had a 470 with a single trigger, and it was weird. Muscle memory. I mean, I'm sure you could get used to it. I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem. But for me, the classic double rifle has 2 triggers, and I like to pull the right barrel first. And if you read the classic African literature, you'll hear him say, "Oh, we gave him a right and a left," and that means that he shot both barrels of his double rifle in that order.
Okay.
So it's a matter of preference. There are good guns with a single trigger, and if sometimes you'll find them with a selector on it, like a shotgun. You can choose which barrel you want to shoot. It all depends on what you're used to and what makes the most sense to you.
And how does the safety mechanism work on most modern doubles anyway?
Well, much like a shotgun. It's usually a tang safety.
All right.
My Heim's it feels just like a shotgun, forward to fire. There are the Krieghoff, and I don't know if Merkel has it too. I don't know if the hand spanner or what they call it. It's got that giant protrusion, which is actually a decocking mechanism. So if you look at a Krieghoff double rifle, the safety looks ginormous. And what the goal is that when it's brought rearward, it's a spring-loaded safety. When it's brought rearward, it actually physically decocks the gun, which makes a lot of sense when you're walking behind a professional hunter for a week. Mm-hmm. Everybody, when you're at the range, it's always, muzzle sweeps, this, that, and the other thing. and I'm sure I'm guilty of it as anybody else, and I've been swept by muzzles by professional hunters. You're carrying firearms in a really weird situation, and I can see where having the gun uncocked mechanically is desirable. However, the amount of force and pressure, and for me, the unnatural movement of pressing forward so hard, when the gun's at port arms, it's easy to do. When the gun's on your shoulder and you try to press the safety forward, it takes a hell of a lot of inertia to move that thing into battery. And I can see where that could be a problem. So, without upsetting anybody, if you have one and you like it, I mean, some guys absolutely love it. God bless you. For me, it's too much going on, and I prefer a more conventional safety.
Is it kind of loud working the safety on the Krieghoff in the fields?
No, it isn't. It's because it's spring loaded. It's not a loud metallic click at all. No.
Okay. All right.
It's just if you need to handle one. Now, my wife is a massage therapist, and from years of using her hands, she has trouble doing that kind of stuff with like shooting a double action revolver. So for her, I said, do me a favor, just out of curiosity. Here's how this works. And she's, I can't, she's struggling with it. And I'm like, I could see where somebody who had any sort of a dexterity issue might have a problem with that. And that's the last thing in the world you want to have go down, is not to put the gun in the battery when you need it to be.
Mm-hmm. Now, it also seems like most of the modern doubles use do not use external hammers. They have just a regular internal box lock. Is that right?
Right. It's either a box lock or a side lock. But hammer guns are an extreme rarity. And while they're wicked cool, I mean, don't get me wrong. If you had a neat underlever with hammers or something like that, it's the cool factor is certainly off the chart. But that's a weapon of yesteryear for sure.
Now, buying a rifle from Heim or Krieghoff or Merkel or something like that, are they made custom to fit you with the stock link and all of that stuff?
Excuse me. I know that Heim does. When I bought mine, I met Chris Sells at the Dallas Safari Club show, and he kind of like measured me as if he was measuring me for the tuxedo for prom night. Mm-hmm. And adjusted the length of pull accordingly and the barrel length to my frame. In a 470, you can go 22, 24, 26-inch barrels. A smaller frame person, a shorter man would probably want 22 because you want the balance of the firearm to be proper. For me, I've got 26. I mean, I'm 6 foot tall, 225, and long arms. So I ended up with like a 14 5/8 length of pull. Which is longer than I would normally expect, especially in comparison to a 13 3/4, standard Winchester 70 or Remington 700. I know that a lot of the bespoke companies will measure you and make the stock to your proper length. And to that point, when I went to the Holland & Holland shop in London, a lot of those really, really fine guns had no recoil pad on them at all. They purposely left the stock long at 15 plus inches, so that when the customer came in who wanted it, they could trim it to his or her length.
I mean, that definitely makes sense. Since we talked about the fact that since these rifles are made to be optimized at shorter range like that, you almost have to have them fit you really well and point really well to get the most out of them.
For sure, and stock fit is absolutely paramount. To that point, stock fit is all of it. It does two things. Number one, like you said, it comes to shoulder. It floats to shoulder is what it does. And it immediately aligns with your face, the proper comb height, et cetera, et cetera. B, the way you feel recoil in a properly designed stock cuts it down considerably from an improperly designed stock. And again, no slight to Merkel, there's a lot of great firearms. They have this comb that kind of drops down. And a Merkel double for me, it must be my stature. It comes up and smacks me in the cheek like, Rocky Balboa would with an uppercut. It's almost uncomfortable to shoot for me. So stock fit, if you're going to buy a double, don't buy it sight unseen. You really need to bring it to shoulder. You need to see it. It's just one of those things that you can't, in my opinion, mail order it, if you would.
Now, in that same vein as recoil, these rifles, especially in the heavier recoiling cartridges, are going to be heavier, right? I see Heim advertises 9 to 13 pounds of weight, depending on the caliber, for the 89B on their website.
Right. You want a 450, 400 to run about 10 pounds. You want a 470 to run about 11. You might get into 11 and a half on a 500. To me, Holland and Holland, their Royal rifles, the ones that I've held, are notoriously light. And I can imagine you would feel that in recoil, while it would be a pleasure to carry for sure. I mean, maybe it wouldn't be an issue. I don't know. Like I said, I've never taken one on a hunt. So, I do know that carrying a gun of that weight compared to a bolt action, you'll feel it by day 3, especially when the heat starts pounding down on you. So there's that part of it. But in comparison to, the very popular Ruger number 1 Tropical, which is available in 450 nitro and a lot of these cartridges, 450, 400, you're going to feel the recoil of a 450 in a single barrel number 1 at 7.25 pounds, much more than you would in a 9-pound or 10-pound double rifle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Doing the apples to apples deal, I imagine, say, a CZ550 or some, say in 4.58 Win Mag or 4.58 lot with a scope on it, fully loaded. It's probably going to be similar in weight, maybe a little lighter, maybe a little heavier than a double in 450 or 470, right?
Yeah. I would think the double will end up being heavier.
Yeah.
Especially
I can
when
see
you got
that.
2 in the car, two in the chambers,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but again, a CZ is, or I should say was, because they're no longer going to be made. The CZ was notoriously corpulent. They made one stock for the 505 Gibbs and the 500 Jeffrey that would handle that level of recoil, and put that on everything. So while it was a great gun and a great value, that heifer needed to be put on a diet for sure. It's just a big stick of wood. There's like 3 stocks in there, but they rarely broke and they were extremely dependable. So there was that value part.
Yeah, definitely.
The carrying of a double rifle, and that's one of my biggest issues with the way a double gun feels. The carrying of a double rifle is the biggest part of it. You start, and now I understand why they had gun bearers when they carried, a pair of 5.77. Here, carry this for a while. And they must have been just totally elated when the 375 came out in this little 8-pound wonder. The 89 versus the 88B, Heims 2, best-selling double rifles. The 88B was a great gun. However, the edges of the 88B's receiver, or action, I should say, are a little more squared and kind of feels almost like a Lego to me. Legos are sharp on the corners. The 89 is all been rounded out and smooth, and it's just a pleasure to carry in your hand all day. So, for me, that part of the design, plus you got the stock design by Ralph Martini. And if you're not familiar with Ralph Martini, you should really look him up. He's a German gun maker who has moved to Canada. And Ralph did not only the stock of the 89B, but he did the Heim Express by Martini. And in my opinion, Ralph Martini knows how to make a stock, period, the end. He should make the world's stocks. It's just the way it is.
Now, we've talked a lot about Heim rifles, in particular, a little bit with Krieghoff and Merkel. Are there any other popular makes of doubles these days that are in current production?
Yeah, Rigby has bought back the Rising Bite. And I'll say this, I know the guys from Rigby, and I love them like brothers. The Rigby Rising Bite is expensive. It's over $130,000.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so, for me, again, I'm a guy of very, minimal means, and I'm a working man. That's just, I didn't pay that for my house. Mm-hmm. If I bought home $130,000 470, I can imagine I'd be receiving a notice from an attorney very quickly. That's the fact that I'd be getting divorced, and rightfully so. But again, if you're well-heeled enough to pull a $130,000 Rising Bite into your collection, or a $200,000 Holland and Holland Royal, or a Purdy or a Wesley, God bless you. You're my hero. And if you're looking for a new adopted son, I am available for adoption if it comes with a decent rifle of that pedigree. Guys hunt them. They do. I know a lot of people who are very affluent, and they appreciate them and they use them. Like I say, the collection we shot at the Dallas Safari Club Historic Rifle Collection is all owned by a guy named Bill Jones. And we're talking Jim Corbett's 450-400. We're talking J.A. Hunter's Boswell 500, Hemingway's 5.77. He takes them hunting. He takes them back to Africa, Bill does. And I think it's fantastic. The collection, I don't know if you could put a price tag on that whole, safe full of guns. But, you know, I'm happy that they do get used and they're not just in a museum somewhere.
And so if someone was interested in buying a new Heim 89B right now, how much are they looking at paying for one?
Don't hold me to this, but the last I heard, I think they started like $23,000.
Yeah, so still very expensive, but in a whole different realm from the Rigby's that you were just talking about.
Right. Now, you can get into a Sabati. I think you can find a Sabati for, I don't know, $7,500, $8,000. And while it functions, I'm going to say that sometimes you get what you pay for.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who've had them and they shoot great and they hunt with them, and that's the end of it. And then so be it. And I know other guys who had, you know, regulation nightmare problems with them. So, you know, I'd want to see the target. I'd want to touch the gun. If something is too good to be true, sometimes it actually is. And again, you know, having looked up and down the spectrum, you know, there's Bernie Karen, there's Chapuis, there's a bunch of French guns. There are values to be found, and it depends on your taste, and it depends on the fit, and, you know, if it has the appointments that you choose. And, you know, for me, I've done a lot of work with Heim, not because, you know, Heim wanted to work with me. I did it because I like the product. You know, the Heim Express by Martini is, in my opinion, the best bolt gun on the market, bar none. It's just designed to the nth degree, and it's a sleeper. The 89B is so close to a proper Wesley Richards at half the price, your head would spin. So, you know, for me, again, could I afford a Sabati? Probably. I'd have to save up for a while, but I'm much more happy investing my money and saving for a little while longer. Look up a used rifle. I mean, if you can find a used 88 or 89, I think that would be a great value for somebody. And if you're really into a double rifle and it means that much to you, and again, this isn't a matter of practicality, if it does mean that much to you, then this is probably the route you'd want to go.
Now, is this a case where if someone bought a used Heim, they could send it back to Heim to get it get the stock adjusted to the right size for them or something like that?
Yeah, I'm sure it would cost money. You know, I don't think they offer that. It's not a cemetery with perpetual care, but I'm sure, you know, with the crew of gunsmiths that they have, just about anything could be done. You know, you could either get it if it's too short, you could get a piece of wood to lengthen the stock properly. Or if it's too long, obviously, you know, cutting it wouldn't be an issue. Yeah, so you would probably want to do that if it didn't fit, and you just said, look, this is too good of a deal to pass down. Get it to fit you. With a double rifle, it's going to be all about the fit, and we're not, you know, pulling a Savage off the shelf at Dick's Sporting Goods and going hunting, which is, you know, I own them too. This is a bit of a different idea. This is more of a bespoke kind of idea with a double rifle. You really want it to be made for you.
Now, are Krieghoff and Merkel doubles, are they in the same general price range as a Heim?
I think they might be a little cheaper.
Okay.
To be brutally honest with you, John, I haven't priced them in years.
All right. Now, is this also something where if someone was very serious about getting into double rifles, that maybe going to DSC or the SCI show in Vegas, they could stop by these booths, handle these, you know, rifles for real in person, see how they fit them, all that stuff? Mm-hmm.
For sure. Look, attend one of the shows. There's the Great American Outdoor Show in Harrisburg, where there'll probably be a couple of double rifles available to hold. There's probably a used gun shop around you that will have some. You know, I know Gordy's has a bunch of double rifles from Rigby and other companies. If you live in the proximity in the Texas area, I mean, I'm sure you could contact Heim and say, look, I'd like to come in and just try and see what it is. If you have a buddy who has one, I highly recommend going to the range, buy him the ammo, buy him a box of ammo, whatever it costs. It's well worth the investment when you look at the long-term money you're going to spend. And shoot the gun, feel how it, you know, how does it come to shoulder? How does is this for me? Because I never handled a double rifle before, and I handled it the first time, and I was like, this is a little daunting. Where's the bolt? You know, that kind of thing. And, you know, the reloading process, it's an art in and of itself, not to take your eyes off the target and be able to crack the gun, you know, dump 2 shells, make sure they get clear of the chamber, and then put 2 more in, all while looking down range at a dangerous game animal. So, I mean,
that's the real thing, right? You know, if you want to be seriously hunting with a double rifle, it seems like you're getting into a giant can of worms with spending a lot of money and investing a lot of time in it to make sure that it functions properly and that, more importantly, you know how to get the most out of it on your actual hunt then.
Well, the same can be applied, though, to a bolt-action rifle. I mean, you've got 4 shots, and sometimes you'll use 4 shots. So you want to be able to reload your bolt gun without looking. That end of it is certainly a dangerous game thing more than it is a double rifle thing. But with a double, you're right. It's a commitment. It's not something you just kind of, look, my 4.7 or my 4.16 went down. Let me borrow your 3.75, and the safety's in the same place, and the bolt works the same way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a different mentality with its drawbacks and with its rewards. And again, from a point of practicality, financially, I don't know that that's the way to go.
Well, like you've talked about a couple times during our interviews, sometimes you do need to throw the spreadsheet away if you just want to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why many PHs don't use doubles just because they can't afford them and things like that. Where some people do, right?
I can tell you what, it's probably 4 to 1 the amount of professional hunters I've worked with that use a bolt versus a double.
Mm-hmm.
I
could believe that.
Especially in Africa, where things are more expensive across the board. I've only had a handful who have had a decent working double, and they said, look, this is what I use. Some guys used, I've seen Winchesters, I've seen Brownings, I've seen all sorts of bolt guns. It's a matter of functionality and practicality. Some guys spend their time doing dangerous game more than not, rather than the plains game hunts. And for those guys, a double does, like we said, it makes a lot of sense. It's a tool. It's an effective tool. For the hunter who's going to go after one buffalo, am I going to say this is the way to go? I don't know. I mean, I'd probably say if it came down to a matter of finances, I would run a really nice bolt gun, put the price of the Safari in your pocket and go hunting rather than save up for a double rifle.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that is a really good way of looking at it. And if the cool factor is that important to you, then by all means do it, but understand what you're getting into.
Mm-hmm. Make no bones about it. It's cool. Especially when you start to practice and you get to, working 2 shots, boom, boom. How fast can I get back on target and, things along those lines.
Well, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you think we missed that you want to cover or anything like that?
No, not really. I would say if you're going to be the double rifle guy, don't be embarrassed to take it deer hunting. There's, I don't have I don't have as many opportunities, I should say, to hunt buffalo as I would like. So I would have no problems if I were hunting in the Northeast woods to take a 470. I mean, I killed deer with 45 70s and they're not too dead. You're not going to blow them to pieces because it's not a high velocity cartridge. You're not going to ruin a lot of meat. And it gives you a lot of opportunities to become much more familiar with your double. So hunting game or, black bear over bait or hogs in Texas, there's a lot of opportunities that you probably wouldn't really think about to use a double rifle and become more proficient with it. And that's only going to make your experience on safari that much better.
Okay, well, I think that is excellent advice, and I think that is a great place to stop today. So, Phil, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us.
John, always a pleasure, and I look forward to next time.
So that is the down and dirty on double rifles. The cool factor is very high with them, to be sure, and they're pretty specialized rifles that are awesome for certain situations, especially for dangerous game up close in the case of a big bore double. However, there is a lot that goes into making one sing. A lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of work becoming proficient with it. That's not to say that you don't need a lot of practice and dedication to become proficient with a bolt-action rifle, especially one in an appropriate dangerous game cartridge, because you do. However, a double rifle isn't something you can just pull off the shelf at Cabela's and roll with. And, like Phil and I discussed, there are some very unique aspects of double rifles that are completely different from a bolt action when it comes to getting it to regulate well, sighting it in, making sure it fits you properly, dealing with 2 different triggers, etc. All of that stuff is worth it to some people, and there is absolutely a reason why so many PHs guiding dangerous game hunts in Africa use them for stopping rifles for when things go south. Now, we've talked a lot about how double rifles excel at short range. That is absolutely true, but they are not purely short-range rifles either. The range limitations of a double rifle are more of a function of the limitations of the aiming system and the shooter rather than the rifle itself. A good optic of some sort, regardless of whether that's a low-powered scope or a red dot sight, can definitely extend the range of a double rifle as long as the shooter is up to the task and has put in the necessary work with load development, regulation, and time at the range. In fact, from a purely utilitarian perspective, a red dot sight is a really good way to go these days. Heim has a cutout on the barrel specifically designed for mounting an optic of some sort that won't throw off the balance of the rifle and will help with aiming. Now, I wouldn't do something like that to an older rifle with some collector's value, but it's really worth considering for a modern double to get maximum use out of one. Now, it's also possible that this discussion has made you realize that you don't really want to be hunting with a double. That's perfectly fine. Doubles aren't for everyone. You can get a great bolt-action, dangerous game rifle that is still extremely effective and is a whole lot easier to use effectively for a whole lot less money than what you'd pay for a good double. Now, not every rifle that's marketed for dangerous game hunting is up to the task, though, and it's not nearly as simple as buying any old rifle chambered in .375 or .416, buying a box of ammo with a dangerous game label on it, and calling it good. Things might work out, but that's also a great way to experience a very nerve-wracking follow-up on a wounded buffalo and potentially have your PH finish it off for you. If things go really bad, someone could end up seriously injured or dead, and nobody wants that. Now, this is something I discuss in great detail in the Dangerous Game Hunting module of Hunting Guns 101. Like I said, a number of companies market rifles and ammunition for use on dangerous game, but only a handful are really up to the job, and figuring out what makes the grade and what doesn't is not an easy task. Fortunately, that module contains detailed information on the specific features that are essential in dangerous game hunting rifles and ammunition, as well as specific recommendation on what you need to be using and exactly why that is the case. This is essential training for anyone interested in hunting Cape buffalo in the foreseeable future. If you apply the lessons I teach in the training and are careful with your hunt preparations, you will have great odds of success regardless of what and where you're hunting. Otherwise, you run the risk of encountering serious trouble on the hunt of your dreams. Don't let that happen to you. Instead, I want you to be able to wrap your hands around the horns of a giant Cape buffalo that you quickly and cleanly killed on your hunt. Click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com/form and fill out the order form to sign up and get instant access today to make sure you are set up for success on the hunt of your dreams. That's huntingguns101.com/form, F-O-R-M. Now, the fact that you are listening to this podcast means that you are serious about making your dreams come true. You can send any questions you have or future show requests to me via email to john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com or send me a direct message on Instagram. My handle is @thebiggamehunter. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and I can help. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.